The courtroom lights glared down like 1,000 judging eyes. It wasn't an actual trial, but the silence before the gavel might as well have been one. At the center table sat Mark Levin, conservative commentator, former lawyer, and self-declared guardian of constitutional truth. His notes were arranged in perfect symmetry, his glasses reflecting the glow of the overhead lights. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, congresswoman, defense attorney, and a name that carried equal parts respect and resistance. The topic was deceptively simple: does education still define leadership? But both of them, and everyone in the room, knew this was about more than degrees or diplomas. It was about credibility, identity, and power. A murmur swept through the packed chamber as cameras adjusted focus. The tension was thick, the kind that clings to skin and silence alike. Then Mark Levin leaned forward, his voice slicing through the quiet. Mark Levin, Congresswoman, you've made your law degree part of your brand. Proof of your qualification. Your intellect. But many of us wonder, does that piece of paper mean you understand governance? Or does it just mean you memorized the right answers long enough to get through the test? The audience reacted, a mix of gasps and murmurs. Crockett didn't blink. Her posture stayed still, chin high, eyes steady. Jasmine Crockett, you know, Mark, every time a woman of color speaks from a place of knowledge, someone asks if her education is real. Funny how that question never seems to come up when the degree belongs to someone who looks like you. Levin's eyebrow twitched, his mouth curving into the faintest smirk. Mark Levin. So now I'm the villain for asking a question. No, Congresswoman, this isn't about race or gender. It's about merit. You wear your law degree like armor, but experience, not paper, builds wisdom. She leaned in slightly. The air shifted.
Jasmine Crockett, armor, no, Mark.
I wear it like memory. Because every client I defended with that degree couldn't afford someone who read the law from behind a microphone. The words landed like a gavel strike. The courtroom fell still. For a moment, Levin didn't answer. His jaw tightened. Then he lifted a page from his notes, slow, deliberate. Mark Levin, if memory serves, Congresswoman, you passed the bar but practiced for what? A few years. Then politics came calling. Don't you think it's fair to ask if you're using that degree as a prop rather than a profession? A low hum of reaction rippled across the seats. Cameras zoomed closer. Crockett's lips curved, but it wasn't a smile. It was the calm before the cut. Jasmine Crockett, you talk about my law degree like it's a trophy, Mark. But education isn't about display, it's about duty. I didn't stop being an attorney when I ran for office. I just changed the courtroom. The witnesses became voters. The verdicts became policy. A flicker of admiration crossed a few faces in the crowd. Levin saw it too, and for the first time, there was a trace of irritation beneath his polished control. He fired back with precision. Mark Levin, then tell me this. Congresswoman, what's the verdict on your education when your policies contradict the very Constitution you swore to uphold? Jasmine Crockett, contradict it, or challenge your interpretation of it. Levin's eyes narrowed. Mark Levin, the Constitution isn't open to interpretation. Jasmine Crockett, neither was segregation. Until someone challenged that too. The silence that followed was seismic. Every breath felt amplified. Levin's knuckles tightened around his pen. The mask of calm cracked just slightly. Mark Levin, you think you can rewrite 2 centuries of legal precedent because of your feelings? Jasmine Crockett, no, Mark. I think we can re-examine 2 centuries of power structures that kept people like me out of the room where those precedents were written. The tension had evolved. It wasn't argument anymore. It was revelation. Levin shifted in his chair, his voice lower, sharper. Mark Levin, you're deflecting, Congresswoman. I'm asking about credentials. You're giving me crusades. Jasmine Crockett, and I'm telling you, the two are inseparable. Education without conviction is just arrogance with a diploma. Gasps. Applause. Even the camera crew hesitated before cutting to Levin's reaction. He leaned back, studying her for a long, heavy beat. Then his tone turned almost mocking. Mark Levin, you must enjoy this, don't you? Playing the righteous defender of justice, armed with your precious degree. Jasmine Crockett, no, Mark. I enjoy the truth. Even when it's inconvenient. She let the silence breathe before finishing. Jasmine Crockett, you mock my degree because it threatens your certainty. You think education should make people obedient. I think it should make them unafraid. The moderator shifted uneasily. The debate wasn't supposed to get this personal. But it had crossed that threshold long ago. Mark Levin exhaled slowly, fingers steepled. Mark Levin, so, You stand by every decision your education has led you to make, Jasmine Crockett, absolutely. Because my education taught me to question even myself. There it was, the subtle blow that disarmed him more than any direct insult. Levin didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked down, adjusting his notes again, not because they needed straightening, but because his composure did. Then he looked up, smile thin and cold. Mark Levin, you've got passion, Congresswoman. I'll give you that. But passion doesn't rewrite law, it just makes good television, Jasmine Crockett. And yet, you built an empire on exactly that. That landed. The audience erupted, laughter, applause, a wave of disbelief at her precision. Levin didn't laugh, his silence said everything. Crockett continued, her tone now steady but commanding. Jasmine Crockett, you wanted to question my education. Fine, it taught me how to see power. Who has it, who abuses it, and who hides behind it. That's why we're here, Mark. Not to trade our some A's but to expose comfort as cowardice. Her words hung in the air like smoke, thick, inescapable. Mark Levin's face tightened again, but something had changed. The crowd's energy had shifted toward her, not out of partisanship, but out of recognition. She had turned his question into an indictment, and the courtroom felt it. The moderator called for a brief recess, citing technical adjustment, but everyone knew they needed the break. The air was too charged. Crockett leaned back in her chair, exhaling quietly. Levin didn't look her way. He just stared ahead, expression unreadable, as though recalculating the next move in a game he thought he'd already won. The cameras zoomed out slowly, capturing both figures, one composed, one reflective, separated by a table, but divided by something far greater principle. And as the feed faded to black for the intermission, the voiceover of the network cut in. If you're watching this live, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what happens next in this courtroom could change everything. The audience stayed glued to their screens. Because this wasn't politics anymore. This was judgment. The recess ended with a slow fade back into the courtroom. The murmur of voices quieted as the judge's gavel echoed once, not to declare order in a trial, but to resume the televised reckoning between two minds built for confrontation. Mark Levin sat poised, every inch of him reconstructed after the break. His papers were no longer neatly aligned, they were stacked with intention, like weapons. He wasn't coming back to spar, he was coming back to win. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett sat unmoved. One hand rested lightly on her folder, the other folded across her lap. Calm, collected, calculating. The moderator cleared his throat. We'll now resume the hearing on educational integrity and leadership. Mr. Levin, you may proceed. Levin's tone was colder now, sharpened steel where earlier it had been polished silver. Mark Levin, Congresswoman Crockett, you seem to believe that questioning your education is somehow an attack. But let me remind you, scrutiny is the price of public office. If your record is solid, why resist examination? Crockett raised a brow, her voice quiet but unwavering. Jasmine Crockett, scrutiny is fair, Mark. But disrespect disguised as inquiry, that's something else. Mark Levin, I never disrespected you. Jasmine Crockett, you questioned whether my education was real, whether my degree had value. In a courtroom, that would be called leading the witness. And you're not qualified to cross-examine me. A light ripple of laughter moved through the spectators, but Levin didn't flinch. Mark Levin, let's talk facts then. You graduated from a law school ranked below the top tier. You practiced briefly before entering politics. Meanwhile, I've spent decades in constitutional study and application. If credentials matter, who stands stronger? Crockett's eyes gleamed, not with anger, but precision. Jasmine Crockett, that depends, Mark. Are we measuring education by rank or by relevance? Levin tilted his head slightly. Explain. Jasmine Crockett, your education taught you how to preserve the system. Mine taught me what it looks like when the system fails people. You studied from the top. I practiced from the bottom. The Constitution looks very different depending on which side of the bench you're sitting on. The audience hushed again. Even the cameraman froze mid-pan. Levin leaned in, voice tight. Mark Levin, so, you're saying the law changes depending on your emotions or social status? That's not justice, that's chaos. Jasmine Crockett, no. I'm saying justice without empathy is chaos. You quote the founders like they were prophets, but half the people they governed weren't even free. You want to lecture me on the law, fine, but I live with its consequences every single day. Levin's smirk vanished. He wasn't used to being lectured in legal philosophy. especially not by someone who refused to take his bait. He straightened his tie and shifted tone. Mark Levin, you make good theater, Congresswoman. But leadership isn't about pain points or emotion. It's about the endurance of principle. Crockett nodded slowly. Jasmine Crockett, exactly. And real principle means holding the law accountable, not hiding behind it when it's convenient. He opened his mouth to respond, but she continued before he could interrupt. Jasmine Crockett, you call this education. I call it insulation. The kind that shields people from seeing how their theories fail in the streets. You built a career defending the Constitution. I built one defending the people it left behind. A gasp echoed again, followed by silence so deep it felt like the room itself was listening. Levin exhaled, visibly restraining himself. Then his tone shifted, calm, almost quiet. Mark Levin, Congresswoman, do you believe that your life experience gives you the authority to reinterpret centuries of legal doctrine? Crockett's voice lowered too, deliberate and cutting. Jasmine Crockett, no. But it gives me the responsibility to question who that doctrine was written for. Levin's eyes narrowed, his words careful now. Mark Levin, so, you want to rewrite the law based on perspective. Jasmine Crockett, no. I want to expand its vision. There's a difference. He leaned forward again, this time not as an attacker, but as a man intrigued, cornered by an argument he couldn't dismiss outright. Mark Levin, you sound like someone who believes the law is alive, evolving. Jasmine Crockett, it is. If it isn't, it's a cage. And last I checked, the Constitution starts with "we the people," not "we the privileged." The gallery stirred. Spontaneous applause broke out before the bailiff's gavel restored silence. Levin's composure cracked for a brief second. His jaw flexed, his pen tapped against the desk. Mark Levin, you know what your problem is, Congresswoman? You think being passionate makes you right. Jasmine Crockett. And you think being loud makes you learned. That one stung. It hit deeper than the crowd could sense. Levin shot back, but slower now, less confident, more deliberate. Mark Levin, let me remind you, I've studied, written, and defended the Constitution longer than you've been in politics. Crockett smiled faintly. Jasmine Crockett, then maybe you should know by now that defending something isn't the same as understanding it. The silence was almost reverent. Levin's pen dropped. His voice grew sharper, colder. Mark Levin, are you implying that I don't understand the law? Jasmine Crockett, no, Mark. I'm implying that you understand the letters, but not the lives they affect. That was the breaking point. Levin rose slightly from his chair, not fully standing but enough to signal frustration. Mark Levin, this isn't about emotion, Congresswoman. This is about structure, civility, and the framework that holds this nation together. Jasmine Crockett. And what good is a framework if the foundation's cracked? You talk about civility, but civility built on silence is compliance. You're defending comfort, not the Constitution. Levin froze mid-motion. Her words were hitting places deeper than political talking points. Mark Levin, you're clever, he said finally, quieter now. But clever doesn't mean correct. Jasmine Crockett. Neither does condescending. The crowd erupted again. But not in laughter this time. It was something else. Awe. Levin glanced briefly at the camera, then back at her. Mark Levin, you play to the crowd well, I'll give you that. But you're not here to perform. You're here to defend your record. Crockett leaned forward, her tone a whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. Jasmine Crockett. My record is the people I fought for. The mother who lost her son to a system that promised justice but delivered paperwork. The worker who was told his voice didn't count. That's my education, Mark. It didn't end with a diploma, it began there. The room went still again. Every word lingered like an echo. Mark Levin, for the first time that night, looked uncertain, not defeated, but shaken. He looked down at his notes as though they no longer fit the moment. Mark Levin, so you're saying my years of study, my credentials, my legal history mean nothing?
Jasmine Crockett, not nothing.
Just incomplete. He looked up. Incomplete, she nodded, eyes steady. Jasmine Crockett. Because education doesn't end when the degree is framed. It ends when you stop learning. And from where I'm sitting you stopped a long time ago. No applause followed. Just silence, deep, heavy, contemplative silence. Levin's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass of water. Crockett's gaze didn't waver once. In that silence, something unspoken passed between them, the recognition that this wasn't just about education anymore. It was about identity. About who gets to define qualified. The moderator's voice cut softly through the air. This concludes round 2. We will resume shortly for rebuttals. As the cameras dimmed for the next break, Levin exhaled slowly. Crockett didn't move. She had turned his challenge into a confession. And when they came back, the real verdict would begin. When the cameras came back on, the air in the courtroom had changed. The energy was heavier now, not loud, not fiery, but dense with tension. The spectators leaned forward. Even those in the press gallery sat motionless, eyes locked on the two figures at the center of the storm. Mark Levin was first to speak. His posture was straight again, his voice ironed clean of emotion. He had been shaken, yes, but Mark Levin was not the kind of man to accept humiliation quietly. He placed his glasses back on his face and spoke slowly, each word chosen with surgical precision. Mark Levin, Congresswoman Crockett, you speak of empathy and experience, as though the law were poetry. But the law isn't written to soothe feelings. It's written to preserve order. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Mark Levin, our founders designed a system of checks, balances, and boundaries for a reason. Because passion without principle is tyranny. You may have practiced law, but I've studied its bones, its architecture. And without that architecture, everything collapses into noise. A few members of the audience nodded, the conservative crowd emboldened by his regained composure. Crockett didn't interrupt. She watched him with an expression that bordered on pity, calm, unbothered, quietly disarming. Mark Levin, you accuse me of lacking empathy, Congresswoman. But empathy without understanding is chaos. You can't legislate feelings. You can't build justice on outrage. The Constitution doesn't bend for circumstance. It endures because it doesn't. He leaned slightly closer, his voice rising with conviction. Mark Levin, and that endurance, that unshakable commitment to principle, is what separates civilization from disorder. It's what separates leadership from activism. The words hung in the air like cold smoke. For a moment, it almost seemed he had regained control. But then Crockett's lips curved into a faint smile, not mocking but knowing. When she spoke, her tone was low, steady, almost gentle. The way a teacher might correct a student who'd been too sure of himself. Jasmine Crockett, Mark, you talk about the Constitution like it's scripture. But even scripture has been reinterpreted over time. The founders you quote, they were not prophets, they were men, flawed, brilliant, complicated men who built a system they hoped would outgrow their limitations. Levin tilted his head. Outgrow them. Or preserve their wisdom. Jasmine Crockett, both. But wisdom isn't fossilized, Mark, it breathes. The founders wrote the Constitution as a framework, not a finish line. That's why it starts with "we the people." It doesn't say "we the privileged" or "we the perfect." It means us. All of us. Even the people they couldn't see when they wrote it. The audience murmured softly, half in agreement, half in anticipation. Levin exhaled sharply. So now you want to rewrite history. Judge the founders by today's standards. Jasmine Crockett, no. I want to hold them to their own words. All men are created equal. That was their promise. My fight is to make that promise real. He straightened. And you think questioning the legal system does that? Jasmine Crockett, no, Mark. I think ignoring the legal system's failures ensures it never does. A flash of something, irritation, perhaps fear, crossed Levin's eyes. He adjusted his tie and replied with practiced calm. Mark Levin, you speak beautifully, Congresswoman. But beauty doesn't change facts. You stand on emotion, not evidence. The law doesn't bend for opinion. It exists to rise above it. Jasmine Crockett. Then explain to me why the same law that's supposed to rise above bias keeps landing on the backs of the same people. Levin froze for a moment. Crockett continued before he could answer. Jasmine Crockett, you say law is order. But when order protects injustice, it becomes oppression with better manners. A low hum rippled through the gallery. The judge didn't gabble this time. Even he seemed caught in the gravity of her words. Mark Levin. So your solution is to replace principle with protest. Jasmine Crockett, no. My solution is to remind people that principle without humanity is hypocrisy. The two stared at each other. The ideological clash now stripped of pretense. It wasn't about degrees anymore. It was about two visions of America colliding head-on. Levin broke eye contact first. He reached for his notepad and read aloud. Mark Levin. You talk about evolution, Congresswoman. But the founders warned against mob rule. They feared the day when passion would overrule principle, when the law would be twisted to suit the loudest voice in the room. Crockett waited a beat, then leaned slightly forward. Jasmine Crockett, and yet, they also feared tyranny. The kind that hides behind polished words and claims it's preserving order while silencing dissent. You say I twist the law with emotion. I say you bury the truth beneath tradition. The crowd shifted uneasily. Even Levin looked briefly unsure how to proceed. Crockett took advantage of that pause, her tone softened. But her words carried the sharpness of finality. Jasmine Crockett, Mark, education isn't about memorizing what's already been said. It's about asking what's missing. You've spent your life studying the law's language. I've spent mine studying its silence. The phrase hit him like a punch through glass. Not loud, but irreversible. Mark Levin. And you believe that silence gives you the right to reshape it. Jasmine Crockett. It gives me the duty to speak where others couldn't. That's not arrogance. That's justice. The courtroom was silent again, but this time it wasn't tension, it was reverence. Crockett wasn't just answering him anymore, she was indicting the system he represented. Levin took off his glasses. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter, almost resigned. Mark Levin, you're idealistic, Congresswoman. I'll give you that. But idealism without discipline builds chaos. And chaos destroys everything, even justice. Jasmine Crockett. Then maybe justice was never meant to be comfortable. Maybe the reason you call it chaos is because for the first time, the law isn't speaking just for you. The words landed like thunder. Levin looked down. His pen tapped twice, slow, deliberate. Then he looked up again, the fire returning to his eyes. Mark Levin, you remind me of every young reformer who thought they could outthink history. But history always wins. Congresswoman. Crockett's smile was faint, the kind that precedes a knockout. Jasmine Crockett, maybe. But history doesn't write itself, Mark. People do. And sometimes the people holding the pen need to be reminded that others exist in the story. Levin opened his mouth, then closed it again. No retort came. That was the moment the room realized it. She wasn't debating anymore. She was teaching. The moderator's voice broke the spell. We'll take a brief pause before the final round of closing statements. But even as the cameras faded, the audience didn't move. Some looked at Levin, wondering how a man so dominant in rhetoric had lost the rhythm. Others looked at Crockett, realizing that education wasn't about the school listed on a resume. It was about the lessons earned in the fight to be heard. As the lights dimmed and Levin's reflection flickered in the desk before him, he whispered, almost to himself, Mark Levin, she really believes it. Crockett gathered her papers, calm and unhurried. Her reply was soft, but every microphone caught it. Jasmine Crockett, no, Mark, I don't just believe it, I live it. And with that, the room exhaled, as if everyone had been holding their breath. The final round was coming, and in that last stretch, one of them would leave with more than victory. They'd leave with vindication. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly, signaling the final round. The atmosphere had shifted. The audience no longer buzzed with divided energy. Instead, they sat in stillness, every eye fixed on the space between Mark Levin and Jasmine Crockett. When the judge's gavel struck wood, it didn't sound like a call to order. It sounded like a drumbeat, one that would echo into memory. We will now proceed to closing arguments. The moderator announced, Mr. Levin, you may begin. Levin rose slowly, smoothing the front of his jacket, the weight of the debate visible in his every motion. His confidence had taken a hit, but he wasn't finished. His voice carried a deep, deliberate calm, the tone of a man determined to regain his ground. Mark Levin, ladies and gentlemen, I stand here not as an opponent of progress, but as a defender of principle. The Congresswoman has given us eloquence, passion, and conviction, but passion does not rewrite the Constitution. Emotion does not replace education. He paused, scanning the faces before him, the cameras, the audience, the judge. Mark Levin, I've spent my life studying law, its origins, its evolution, its purpose. The founders created something extraordinary, a framework built on reason, not rage. They understood that human emotion is fleeting, but principle endures. And it's that endurance that has kept this nation alive. He turned toward Crockett, gesturing slightly. Mark Levin's. Congresswoman Crockett would have you believe that empathy should guide the law, that we must reshape its meaning to suit the suffering of the moment. But if we bend the law every time it offends us, it ceases to be law at all. It becomes opinion. And nations built on opinion do not last. The audience murmured softly, the tension reawakening. Levin's cadence built strength with each line. Mark Levin, Education is not about where you come from. It's about what you learn. I've studied the Constitution not as an idealist, but as a realist. Because idealism without boundaries is anarchy. You can have compassion, yes, but compassion without order destroys the very structure that protects freedom. He paused, voice dropping to a controlled whisper. Mark Levin, Congresswoman, you've built a moving argument. But in your pursuit to reform the law, don't forget, it's the law that gave you the platform to challenge it. You didn't rise above the system. You rose through it. And that is the ultimate proof of its success. With that, Levin sat down. The silence that followed wasn't triumphant. It was wary. His words were strong, but they trembled on the edge of something incomplete, as though the courtroom itself knew the argument had form, not soul. The moderator turned to Crockett. Congress closing remarks. Crockett rose, slow and measured. The light from above caught her expression. Not defiance, not pride, but quiet resolve. When she spoke, it wasn't loud. It was intimate, as though she were speaking directly to the conscience of every person in the room. Jasmine Crockett, Mark, you say the law gave me the platform to challenge it, but that's not the full truth. The law didn't give me anything. People fought for me to stand here. People who bled, marched, were silenced, so the Constitution could one day speak for all of us, not just some of us. She stepped forward slightly, the rhythm of her words deepening. Jasmine Crockett, you talk about order and principle as if they were sacred. But order isn't holy when it silences justice. Principle isn't noble when it protects inequality. You say you defend the Constitution. I say I defend its promise, the one it keeps forgetting. The audience leaned forward, not one whisper among them. Jasmine Crockett, you've spent your life studying the law, Mark. I respect that. But you studied it from books, from history, from the safety of distance. I studied it in real time, in courtrooms filled with families who had already lost before the gavel fell. In neighborhoods where equal protection under the law was just a phrase, not a fact. Her voice cracked slightly, but not from weakness, from truth. Jasmine Crockett, education is not just about learning what was written. It's about understanding why it was written, and who was left out of its writing. A pause. Every camera, every lens, every breath hung suspended. Jasmine Crockett. The founders were brilliant, yes. But they also expected the next generations to continue their work. They didn't build perfection. They built potential. And potential means progress. The law must grow or it becomes a monument, cold, still, untouchable. Levin looked down at his papers, his face tight, unmoving. Jasmine Crockett, you say emotion doesn't belong in law. But law without emotion is machinery. Justice without empathy is cruelty dressed in ceremony. She stepped closer now, her tone rising, each word gaining power. Jasmine Crockett, the reason I fight, Mark, the reason I question, is because I love this country enough to expect more from it. You see rebellion, I see responsibility. You call it chaos, I call it courage. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, his hand frozen above the gavel. Jasmine Crockett, you said I rose through the system. That the law worked because I succeeded. But a system that only works for the exceptions isn't working. I don't want to be the exception, Mark. I want to be the proof that the system can work for everyone. The tension was unbearable. Levin sat completely still. Crockett took one final breath, her closing words like a verdict unto themselves. Jasmine Crockett, you challenged my education. But education isn't a degree. It's the courage to confront what's wrong and learn how to make it right. The Constitution doesn't belong to the past. It belongs to anyone brave enough to believe in its unfinished future. Silence, then, a sound. One person in the back clapped, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire courtroom was standing. The applause wasn't loud, it was powerful, reverent, like thunder rolling over distant hills. Levin didn't look up immediately. His pen rested on the desk, unmoving. He wasn't angry anymore, he was humbled, reflective. The kind of silence that comes only when truth dismantles pride. Crockett didn't smile. She didn't bask in the applause. She simply lowered her gaze, gathered her papers, and whispered, softly enough that only the microphone could catch it. Jasmine Crockett. That's what real education looks like. The camera zoomed in on Levin's face, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he seemed ready to respond. Then he exhaled and gave a slow, respectful nod, and with that, the debate ended. The judge's gavel came down for the final time. This session is adjourned. But everyone in that courtroom knew it wasn't just a session that ended. It was an error of underestimation. Crockett didn't just defend her education, she redefined what educated truly meant.